Hello once again, and this is My Life in Film, and we've reached the year 1982. So, 1982. This isn't as big a year as 1981, not particularly because there wasn't as many films out worthy of note, but more that there's not a lot of films out that I actually have seen. There are some that I'll mention at the end that I've not got round to seeing, and the list is quite a bit bigger than last time. So let's just start off with the usual roundup of the top 10 US box office. Eventually we're going to shift towards the international box office because at this point it is starting to get more and more accessible for all the old information, so I'll be able to throw in what happens worldwide. But anyway, so we've got E.T., Tootsie, Officer and a Gentleman, Rocky 3, Porky's, which we mentioned on the last one, came out at the back end of last year, so it carried through to 82. Star Trek, Wrath of Khan. We will be talking about this film. 48 Hours, Poltergeist, The Best Little Whorehouse in Texas, and the lovable, red-haired, red-dressed Annie. And I just about managed to say that without feeling utter bile rising in my throat. News. Quick roundup of the film-related news of this year. Coca-Cola acquired Columbia Pictures for $750 million in June of this year. On the set of The Twilight Zone, which was being filmed, there was a tragic accident that went wrong involving a helicopter, which resulted in the death of the actor Vic Morrow and two young child actors. The incident led to stricter safety regulations on sets and also stricter child labour laws. It was a major tragedy, and it really hit the development of the film. We will get to talk about the film itself when it gets released the following year. And this was the year that the THX surround sound system was developed for movie theatres. Now, the THX has kind of been pushed to one side now. It's no longer like a big thing, but you know, there was an era where if you saw the THX logo outside a screen, you knew you were in for a treat. It was a sound engineering approach to give the perfect cinematic experience, and obviously it has that memorable, iconic rising noise, which blows a lot of speakers when you try and do it in your home. Yeah, so that's the news from this year. Oscars-wise, Gandhi took home some of the Choice Awards of Film, Director, Actor and Screenplay. Officer and a Gentleman and Sophie's Choice bagged a few awards, and the original score was given to E.T.'s score by John Williams, and the score for Victor Victoria by Henry Mancini and Leslie Bricusse. A double win. And that's the quick roundup. So let's move straight on to the films. So let's just start with some just generic films of note. So we've got Firefox. Now, I'm not saying that this is a film worth seeking out, because I have got it and I have rewatched it, and it doesn't quite stand up in this day and age. But what I will say is that I adored this film as a child, and that's the point of these videos. These films might not be good or bad, but the things that had some impact on me. It's a Cold War spy thriller, and that's the aspect that doesn't stand up in this day and age. In the same way that Rocky 4, it feels a bit like, and I can't wait to see what he does with the re-edited version, because it feels a bit out of date, because that Cold War era has well gone. Well, anyway, this Cold War spy thriller, directed by Clint Eastwood and starring Clint Eastwood. He plays a pilot who's sent to steal a top-secret plane known as Firefox from those darned Ruskies. It's based on the book by Craig Thomas. It wasn't actually well received at the time, so adults realised that this wasn't a very good film. And it's good reason that it wasn't well received. It's not a good film when you watch it as an adult, but as a child, this was fascinating. This was thrilling. The design of the plane is what really grabbed my attention. It's sleek, it's stealthy, it's beautifully sculpted, and it's just a great engaging film as a kid. The effects work definitely don't stand up these days. It looks pretty bad, but as a child I loved this film and I would keep a lookout for it. As I've said before, Radio Time's out, circling those little dates. Need to watch this. The first Rambo film came out this year, First Blood. And now the first Rambo film is kind of been buried in the mess that the franchise has become. because the first one's quite a well-focused tale. It's not the over-exuberant, like, bodies aplenty film that the films have now been. It's co-written by Stallone, who plays John Rambo, and it's based on the novel by David Morrell, and it looks at post-traumatic stress of the veterans coming home from Vietnam to a world that no longer has any respect for them, and some people don't actually want them. They see them as problems and trouble. And when Stallone's Rambo, all the trauma coming back to him, he's been trying to seek out one of his friends, he's found that he's been killed, and then the small community that he's in just basically wants him out and start to push him, and the whole "don't push me" grew. It's got some brutality, it's got some great action, but it's the core essence of the film that makes it stand out. This is a film which, when I caught it in my early teens on VHS, I loved it for the action, I loved it for, like, the effects work and the brutality. But as I grew older and rewatched it, I actually love it more for the storyline aspect. It's a great film, and it's a shame that the franchise then goes on to be gung-ho and, like, Rambo saves the world kind of approach for the next couple of films. And whilst there was always the hope that the most recent Rambo film would have got it back to this grassroots thing, it's still now far too focused in how many different gory deaths can we throw up on screen with loads of different traps. Anyway, from gory deaths and explosions to peaceful protesting, and we have Gandhi, the film based on the life of Mahatma Gandhi. This Richard Attenborough directed film sees Ben Kingsley in the lead role, and it's well deserving of the plaudits it received. I watched this way back. I must have been like under 10 because I was at primary school when this came out, and I definitely watched it then. And then I watched it in my teen years and still found myself captivated by the whole story. It's one that I've not been back to rewatch for a good 2 decades, but I think I might, even though I've already ticked it off on my Oscars watch list, I think I might pop it on the list just to give it a revisit. Back to Stallone, who was having a busy year, we also had Rocky 3. Now, by this point, the franchise was basically formulaic. This time, the new aggressor is Clubber Lang, played by Mr. T, with full exuberance. He gets into the role, he relishes it, and he has some great lines. But it is just more of the same. We've already had the initial film with the, guy from the streets, shows that he can take on the world, doesn't win, but then the rematch in the second film, he proves that, he can get better. Now it's just a case of, hey, look, he gets beat down, and now he rises back up, and this is what the formula becomes going forward. However, once again, it's the soap operatic, dramatical aspects of the family life that he's building around him, the friendships that he's building, and everything other than the boxing is what offers the interest. It's the life journey of Rocky that we're now becoming invested in. This is also the film that gave us the iconic song Eye of the Tiger by Survivor, which is now attributed to everything to do with Rocky. Great song, not so great a film, but still worth seeing, average. Let's talk about musicals, because there was a few musicals out this year. I've already mentioned one of them. In fact, I've mentioned 2 of them, because there was 2 of them in that top 10 list. So let's start with The Best Little Whorehouse in Texas. And this is a Broadway musical from the 70s that was brought to cinematic life with Dolly Parton and Burt Reynolds in the 2 lead roles. It tells the tale of the Chicken Ranch, a whorehouse that has a local sheriff that has a personal relationship with the owner of. The sheriff is played by Reynolds. The owner of the whorehouse is Dolly Parton. But when the popularity of the place is broadcast on national TV, it leads to some troubles. Comical and with some memorable songs, the charms of the lead help carry it. I caught this in my mid-teens, and ever since I've had the Texas has a whorehouse in it song rattling around my head continuously. And every now and then I'll break into song with it, and people just look at me like, what are you on? It's like, you need to check out the film. Go find The Best Little Whorehouse in Texas. It's great. Anyway, one musical that isn't great, Annie. Let me talk about Annie. I was taken to watch this as a child. I was subjected to this at an early age, and I have an immense dislike of this film. I hate everything about it. But what I hate most about it is the songs. The songs are earworms that have buried themselves deeply into my brain right from this very first time of watching it, and are constantly rattling around. There's "The sun'll come out tomorrow." I hate that song, but I can't stop singing it. Then you got "Hard Knock Life." I hate that song, but I can't stop singing it. All of these songs from this are so buried into my brain, and I can't get them loose. I was subjected to this at an early age. Everyone who I meet seems to have some kind of love for it, and I've been subjected to rewatching it throughout my life through other people going, "Oh, I'm going to put Annie on." If I could go backwards in time and wipe one film from history, it would be Annie. And all the remakes that happened in recent years. Awful film. It shivers down my throat, my spine. Shivers down my spine right now, just talking about it. Grease 2. Now, some people will tell you that this is a great sequel. Some people will tell you the songs are better than the first. A bunch of people even claim that this is better than the original Grease. Those people are nuts. They have no idea what they're talking about, and they really, they're either pulling a huge prank on you to force you to watch this garbage, or, they genuinely believe it, and I kind of feel sorry for them. It isn't good. The songs aren't great. They're not memorable, and it's definitely not even a scratch on the original. Michelle Pfeiffer is in her first starring role here, and she's very awkward. But not as awkward as Maxwell Caulfield, who has zero charisma and zero on-screen chemistry with Pfeiffer. The songs are immediately forgettable. The whole mess is a poor affair, and it's an attempt to ride the tails of the first film's success, but adding bikes in. As a kid, I got took to see this at the cinema, and whilst as a kid, with my naive eyes, I kind of saw it and went, it was okay, that. It was okay. When it came to rewatching it in my later teens, I realised what a steaming pile it was. I tried giving it a revisit about 3 years ago, just to see whether, over age, I've grown to love and accept it a bit more. And it was a chore. But as a kid, the experience of this as a kid, actually, I kind of liked it. When I watched it in my teen years and realised it was bad, I then had a few years after then that I didn't want to watch the original because this film had tainted the memories of the original. That's how bad it was. One film that I will rewatch over and over again. Let me just take a sip of my drink. One musical film that I will watch over and over again, and that is Pink Floyd's The Wall, directed by Alan Parker, adapted from the album by Pink Floyd, and starring Bob Geldof as Pink, the jaded, drug-addled frontman of a rock band who's been building an emotional wall throughout his life to block out the traumas that go on, from the loss of his father as a child, the illnesses that he suffered, the overbearing mother, the wife who he didn't show any care for, and so she left him for another man, etc, etc. Everything. He builds a wall to block out his emotions, but that wall's got to crack and it's got to break, and when it does, maybe Pink himself will break. The album is great. The story that the album tells is powerful, it's moving, and this film adaptation is visually stunning, and it's given animated imagery by Gerald Scarfe, which lend perfectly to create a film that grabbed me at an early age, thanks to Another Brick in the Wall music video appearing on top of the Pops. That was my first introduction to going, ooh, this looks interesting. Then when I watched the film, I loved it, and this is a film that I keep going back to, and I just love and love and love over again. It's a great visual and musical journey through rock stardom. Okay, let's move on to sci-fi and fantasy, a topic that, as regular watchers will know, is very close to my heart. And this was a good year for sci-fi and fantasy. We had the childhood animation Flight of Dragons from Rankin Bass. This was a film that I thought I'd had a fever dream about, because no one seemed to know what I was talking about through most of my years when I was talking about this. But in recent years, I've discovered that I'm not alone. There are people out there that remember this. It's an animated film that sees an age of fantasy under threat, and a 20th century board game designer is enlisted to travel back through time and save the dragons. I remember the science behind the dragons being explained. I remember the fun, I remember the adventure. And whilst the animation looks old and dated now, it's the voice cast and the really strong and very mature story that makes this a pleasure to re-watch as an adult. As a kid, I just loved I loved anything to do with dragons as a child, and it had great representations of dragons in this. But as an adult, you start to notice like how really well written this story was. Quite bizarre for Rankin Bass, who, as you'll know from previous episodes, I've not got a lot of love for. Now, I'm going to mention one film, and only for the reason that it's not a film that I rewatched after I watched it, and it's not a film that I enjoyed. I'll tell you what the film is first. The film is The Beastmaster. Now, my mentioning this is because I finally got round to watching this in my mid-teens after having multiple schoolmates tell me how great it was and start to talk about like so many sections of the film and all the characters are great and joyful. And so when I got round to watching it, I had to check whether there was another film called The Beastmaster available at the video shop, because this couldn't have been the same film. This was my first experience of feeling like I was alone in my opinion on a film, because everyone seemed to love this film and I hated it. I thought it was garbage. It was poor. It was cheap. I'm not sure what it was trying to do. It didn't work for me. But you know, I didn't want to let people know that I didn't like it, so I just played along and pretended that it was really good. It's only in more recent years as an adult that I've started to go, well, you know what? We all have different opinions, so it's fine to do it. But this was my first experience of feeling like I was bucking the trend and I was going against what everyone else was saying. On the flip side, we do have Conan the Barbarian, which for me is what epic fantasy should be. Directed by John Milius, starring Arnold Schwarzenegger, and this was the film that rose him to prominence. And when I watched this, again, it was a home rental because this was a high rating in the UK, so I couldn't see it on the big screen. It was bloody, it was brutal, it was swords and sorcery done right, and this has created what people think that Conan should look like from now. So whenever anyone gets cast as Conan now, they always get automatically compared to Schwarzenegger. And what a prime positioning it was for him. It rose into worldwide popularity. Absolutely great film. And yeah, you've got James Earl Jones in there as well, who's lending a really great presence to the whole thing. It's more than what it should be, and it does the books justice. One film that, well, it kind of does the books justice, but doesn't really adapt the book directly, and that's Ridley Scott's Blade Runner, starring Harrison Ford. Now, this is a film that I have never grown tired of. I might have grown tired of one version, but thankfully, you know, every 4 or 5 years, it seems that Ridley Scott just wants to release another variation on the editing. Joke. Blade Runner. Now, I was too young to watch this when it came out at the cinema. However, I did for Christmas this year get the annual, which had the comic book adaptation of Blade Runner, and I loved it. The artwork in the comic book adaptation was very, very faithful to the film. It was modelled on the actual scenes and the actors, and I pored over this story and read this annual multiple times within a week, basically. So once it finally came out on VHS and it was rented, I already knew what I was going to be watching, and seeing it brought to vivid life was absolutely joyful. The effects, the design, it started my fascination with cyberpunk as a genre. This whole like dark future, corporations controlling mankind. That when I first watched this in my younger days, the whole underlying, oh, is he a replicant or not, wasn't prevalent. It's only as I got older that became more, oh, maybe he's a replicant. And this is a film that as you age, the film ages well alongside you. Now, going back to the first original release with the voiceover makes me cringe. The voiceover was clearly not needed. It was patronising at times. I don't need... while there's information coming up on the screen, I don't need a voiceover going, skin jobs, that's what he called them. Well, we know that's what he called them because that's what he's just said. It's really not worth seeing that one. The director's cut I picked up when it came out on VHS in the early 90s, and that got rewatched over and over again. I've picked up the DVD of this. The final cut I've got on Blu-ray. I will never grow tired of Blade Runner as a film, and it bombed when it got released at the box office, but it grew a cult audience, and that's because people like me, who were too young to watch it, couldn't lift the box office figures. But over time, we've grown to love it on the home releases. And, you know, we managed to get a beautiful sequel, which again bombed at the box office, and probably 20 years, 30 years from now, we might get a sequel to that. Who knows? From dark sci-fi to light sci-fi, and we've got E.T. the Extraterrestrial. Now, Steven Spielberg delivered absolute perfection with this film, a tale about a boy and a lost alien trying to get home. He gave the world Drew Barrymore, which I'll forgive him for. But this is a film that, again, it hit me at an early age when I watched this on the big screen. The effects work, the majesty of it, that score by Williams, everything grabbed my attention. And as I get older and I revisit it again, I'm drawn back to that experience, and I can't help but feel myself welling up with tears throughout the film at various moments where it just rips your heartstrings apart. Absolutely brilliant film. It's timeless classic. The poorly conceived CGI fixing, tweaking that was done about a decade and a half, 2 decades ago, no, not worth seeing. Ignore that one. We don't want walkie-talkies instead of guns. We want them to be guns because it doesn't make sense when someone's pointing a walkie-talkie at someone. There's a load of tweaks that were made on that special release that diminish the film. Stick to the original version. Explore the beauty and majesty of it. E.T. is one of the best sci-fi films of all time. Before I get to the last one from the sci-fi, let's mention one that again has stuck with me since a kid, because mostly the visuals captivated me as a youngster, and over time I've grown to embrace the story more and more, and that's Tron. Jeff Bridges plays Flint, an arcade owner and former software developer who's been trying to hack into Encom's mainframe to find out what they're up to, but finds that there's a master control program that kicks him out and is basically controlling everything. So he sneaks into there to see if he can hack into the mainframe from within, and ends up within the virtual world of the mainframe, where he finds that the master controller has full authority, but there's a resistance movement, which is amongst the resistance is the character of Tron, played by Bruce Boxleitner, who need to get to the centre and destroy the MCP and make the world of the mainframe free again and refresh the system. It's a great concept, and yes, a lot of it was designed so that you could go, look at these flashy CGI graphics that you're seeing for the first time on cinematic screens. Effects do look dated today, but they work with the charm of the era that they're set in. The film is definitely set in the 80s, and so the graphics represent that kind of era. It's got the thrill of the light cycles, which resulted in 101 different variations of video game based upon it. You've got battle tanks. You've got some great designs. You've got a great cast. You've got a lot of fun, and we got a sequel from it, which hopefully will eventually get a third sequel. Hopefully we'll eventually get a third film. So now we move on to the sci-fi film of the year as far as I'm concerned, and that is Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan. Now, the uniqueness about this one is that the director, Nicholas Meyer, did a great thing by approaching the film as a naval exercise kind of film. He didn't approach it as a space-set sci-fi adventure. He took a naval approach, so the way that things operate on board the Enterprise is a very naval way. Hence, images of people lifting up boards and loading torpedoes manually, etc., etc. It's still very much sci-fi, But that approach gives it a grounded realism that makes it immediately accessible to people who don't really know Star Trek. You don't need to know the past history of these characters because the film itself will tell you all that you need to know. If you are a fan of the characters from the past, you are straight away on board, and this was the film that really started to use their characters more than the situations as the story points. They're all getting on in the years. Kirk is now promoted up to Admiral and overseeing training, and he wants to get back he wants to get back in the captain's seat and go exploring the galaxy again. And when an adversary from the past, Ricardo Montalban's Khan, reappears, who fans of the series will recognise from Space Seed, it gives him a reason to get out there and go and confront Khan and help save the day, and also stop Khan getting his hands and using the Genesis device, which is the most devastating device ever created by scientists. It's a great film. It's so much character in here, and anyone who's a fan of the series and a fan of these characters since the early days who doesn't feel their heart breaking at the end of this film is clearly not as big a fan as they think they are. Great film. It is the best Star Trek film in my opinion. There are some bad Star Trek films which we'll get to eventually, but this was one that, right from seeing the first trailer on screen before like something that I'd watched in 1981, I knew that I had to see this. And when I saw this on the big screen, the musical score is iconic. The visuals still stand up today, and the characters are so well rounded. This is my favourite sci-fi film of the year. So let's move on to horror, which is really starting to ramp up this year. Now, not worth mentioning are a couple of sequels. Amityville 2: The Possession is a tired prequel to the Amityville Horror, which wasn't itself a good film. And Friday the 13th Part 3, the formula continues, not worth mentioning. One sequel that is worth mentioning, though, is Halloween 3: Season of the Witch. This was what the Halloween franchise was supposed to be in the first place. It was supposed to be a series of anthology films, each one being its own little tale, but not connected. And so this was the first kind of real original sequel to the Halloween franchise. It tells the tale of a corporation known as Silver Shamrock, who manufacture masks, and on the run up to Halloween are dominating the market with their unique masks that they're encouraging everyone to wear on Halloween, and specifically when tuning in to their big 9 PM giveaway. You see, each of the masks has a little chip on it, and what that chip does will be revealed in the big 9 PM giveaway that everyone needs to tune into. 3 more days to Halloween, 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 earworm tune in your head, that's it. However, there's something wrong with the masks. People who've been trying to tamper with the chip to find out what it does have been inflicted with severe injuries. And it turns out that they're being used to bring about a mass sacrifice to reawaken the age of witchcraft. It's a great film. It got no reception at the box office. It was critically destroyed when it came out, but it's grown a cult audience over the years. And whilst it was kind of forgotten for quite a while, in more recent years it's been embraced more and more by the horror community as being one of the best Halloween films, and with good reason. Creepshow saw Romero and King combine to present a horror anthology of 5 stories with a homage approach to the old EC horror comics. Some of the tales within here work better than the others, but the ones that do make the whole thing worthwhile, and this was the start of a small wave of horror anthologies or thriller anthologies that would follow in following years. King himself is cast in the second story, which is loosely adapted from one of his short stories about a farmer who finds a meteorite, and then plant life starts growing around the meteor crater and then all over his body. It proves that Stephen King can't act, but it kind of works for the tone that this film is taking. Worth seeing? Definitely. Worth revisiting? Definitely. Every time I rewatch it, I still enjoy it. The Creepshow franchise is still going today, thanks to Shudder, who have been doing an anthology series. Definitely one that I loved as a kid and has stuck with me ever since. Poltergeist. Watched this at an early age, maybe too early an age, because wow, this chilled the hell out of me. Tobe Hooper directs, but rumours suggest that Spielberg was close on hand to make his own changes. In a memorably chilling horror that swiftly became one of my favourites once it landed on home video. It's a tale of a family whose housing estate has been built on the top of an ancient burial site, and some spirits are manifesting and moving things around in the house, and they're particularly attracted to the young Carol Ann, played by Heather O'Rourke, who ends up being kidnapped by the spirits and taken to the other side. Enter some psychics and mediums to try to control the situation and get Carol Ann back. And there's so many chilling moments in this film. There's so many elements that work. And it's kind of one of those, it's one of those horror films that you can watch at an early age if you're ready for horror. And I was kind of ready for horror, but this still hit me quite hard, and it's stuck with me since. It's a family-friendly horror to a degree, although there are some really gruesome moments in there. There's nothing sexual or over the top in it, so it's safe to show any of your youngsters who are showing a love and a preference towards horror. Which is why I got to watch it, because I was already reading Stephen King books by this age. Thoroughly worth revisiting. Don't watch the remake, but revisit this, and by all means, watch the sequel. The second film at least, don't watch the third, it builds upon where this one leaves off. Great film. And finally on horror, let me mention a small little film, adapted from the book Who Goes There, and it's from a director named as John Carpenter, who gave us Kurt Russell front and centre as R.J. McCready in The Thing. If you don't know what The Thing is, really, you need to broaden your horizons. When I watched The Thing in my mid-teens, it was straight away I was caught by the situation. Antarctic base, fully isolated, claustrophobic atmosphere. The sci-fi approach, which this story had already been adapted with The Thing from Another World in the 50s, but this time the way that it adapted it is what made it stand out. Rob Bottin's creations of horror monstrosities throughout, as this shape-changing beast morphs into different creatures, or people, or strange upside-down heads with spindly spider legs. Absolutely chilling and almost flawless. The effects work is amazing. And the cast are great. The cast are all great. And there's some great moments in there of levity that just break the tension enough without damaging it. The Thing is a timeless classic. And it's a perfect example of why we shouldn't dismiss remakes when they get announced. Remakes can sometimes build and develop on the original film and make something unique, and The Thing is very, very unique. It's a film that during my teens I used to watch every couple of months, and I still watch it every year at least once. I adore this film, and I still think that the effects work stands up. Let's quickly move on to comedy. Not a great deal on comedy. We did have Airplane 2, the sequel, which came out this year, and as a kid I really embraced this, but as I've gotten older I've realised it's not a patch on the original, and you can tell that Zucker Abrams had absolutely nothing to do with it. There's moments in there. It's again playing on disaster movies. This time it's a space flight to the lunar surface, because there's now a base on the moon that people can travel to, and it's just more of the same japery. Worth seeing? Yeah. Worth revisiting afterwards? No, not at all. There's also Monty Python Live at the Hollywood Bowl, which, if you're a fan of Python, this is worth seeing. And as a kid, I was a fan of Python. I loved the TV series Monty Python's Flying Circus, so seeing them reenact some of their most famous sketches, but with variations and little tweaks and little changes and unexpected surprises, was great, and this was something that I think when it was on TV, I recorded it, and then I'd go back and rewatch it. Me and my mates were huge Python fans. I had the books of the scripts, and we would sit and, like, this is round about when I was 16, we would sit and we would reenact scenes from Python. We absolutely loved them, and this was more of the same. Great. But the highlight of comedy for me this year was a film that for years I got blank expressions from whenever I mentioned to people, and that's Steve Martin's Dead Men Don't Wear Plaid. Directed by Carl Reiner, it takes a load of footage from old black and white films with all the icons of the era, Bogart, etc., and inserts Steve Martin into them to create a comic noir mystery thriller. The mishmash works, and whilst it's not as well known as Steve Martin films of the time, this was one I've always championed ever since catching it in my early teens. Well worth checking out. And let's round up with one last film, which is The Dark Crystal, Jim Henson puppet-led fantasy tale that tells of a young gelfling who's sent to heal the crystal that has cracked as part of a prophecy and stop the evil that is plaguing the world in the form of the Skeksis and their many creations. The puppet work and design are marvellous, perhaps the best that Henson Studios have ever delivered us, and the story is deep and well fleshed out. As a kid, it was how it looked and the charm of it that engaged me. As an adult, it's how mature the story actually is, and how well woven and how layered it all is. And in recent years, it's been great to see a revival of it, particularly on the run up to the prequel TV series that came out last year, that is well worth checking out as well. Dark Crystal is a timeless family classic. So, before I disappear today, let's just go over quickly the films that didn't make the list because I've actually not got around to watching them yet. And some of these you'll probably go, really? So first of all, we got Plague Dogs. Now, I keep getting told I need to watch this, and as soon as I can get a copy, I will. 48 Hours, Eddie Murphy's first big screen outing. This is one of the films that pretty much everyone I know has seen. I've never seen it. Fast Times at Ridgemont High, Officer and a Gentleman, Q the Winged Serpent, The World According to Garp, and Wes Craven's Swamp Thing, which was a comic book adaptation that proved that not all comic book adaptations are about men who can fly. They're the films that I feel that I should have seen, that I've not seen. If there's any more that I've not mentioned, pop them in the comments below as always, and I'll see you when we get to 1983. Stay safe, people, and remember, #SaveOurCinemas.